Thank you so much for being here. I wanted just to introduce the Family Resource Center again. We are serving families of children with disabilities or special needs from ages 0 to 22. We provide services in San Mateo County, and also we are supporting families with care coordination, resources, referrals, and also provide trainings that have the goal to improve advocacy skills for families and navigate the systems. I wanted just to also give a couple of kind of like protocols or guidelines for this presentation, housekeeping items. We want to mention that we're recording this training, so we encourage everybody to, rename yourself for confidentiality. Also, if you are not speaking, please mute yourself. You can have your video on and off based on your personal preference. We invite grace and generosity and respect through this training. We are often in simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today, so we're going to put in the chat can you select to go to the Spanish channel. If you're listening this in English, we ask that you select at the bottom of the Zoom menu the option to hear this presentation in English. So, and if you want to go to the Spanish channel, please be sure that you select the language and go to the channel that you want to listen to. We will have QA questions at the end of this presentation, and we will stop the recording at that time to also keep confidentiality. And if you have any questions, please be mindful that in the chat, refrain from using full names or any other information that might, be breaching the confidentiality. And at the end of this presentation, during the QA, a little bit before the end, we will be pasting in the chat the survey for SurveyMonkey link, so we can get your feedback about how this training went for you. And we also appreciate any of your questions that you might have post training. The day after, we usually send an email to families with PowerPoint presentations and any other resources that Disability Rights California will share with us of today's training. And well, I'm gonna then, if Gabriela, can you put in the chat how to communicate with us? The Family Resource Center is available Monday to Friday. We have a line, we have an email, a website, so you can connect with us if you have any questions. And now I'm going to introduce Disability Rights California team.
Thank you, Patricia, and welcome everyone. Thank you for spending your evening with us. We truly appreciate your time. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lonnie Pfeiffer with Disability Rights California. My colleague Raymond Kwong is from the San Diego area, and then you have our presenter for this evening, Emily Ikuta, who Raymond will introduce formally. But for those who don't know about Disability Rights California, we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We provide legal services for people with disability. We work on issues such as special education, regional center services, public benefits, housing, employment, services from the Department of Rehab, and so forth. We have offices in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and San Diego, and our smaller offices are in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. I'm now going to turn it over to Raymond.
Good evening again, everyone. So our presenter today, as Lonnie said, is Emily. She is a staff attorney within Disability Rights California Legal Advocacy Unit. She worked within the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Practice Group, which strives to help individuals with developmental disabilities access regional center services and avoid institutionalization. Prior to DRC, she worked as an associate attorney at Adam & Associates, a special education law firm, and interned at the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. She received her Juris Doctor from USC Gould School of Law. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Emily.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you on this on a Monday night. And so like as presented, I am an attorney. My focus is specifically on access to regional center services mostly. And Early Start is that interesting area of services where it does involve the regional centers, as well as the school districts, the Department of Education. So that is why I'm covering this portion of the presentation. As Raymond said, I have provided services free of charge, ranging from representing clients at hearing, at mediation, going to IPP meetings, and even helping to draft complaints or reaching out to the regional center directly. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight into tonight's presentation, Early Start, California's Early Start Early Intervention System. So this is just to give you some context, some background behind the Early Start program. And so the Early Start program was the result of federal legislation creating the early intervention system. So this was under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And so that was the federal law that created this right for families to receive these early intervention services for infants and toddlers under age 3. And so in response to that federal legislation, our state, California, created what their version of that called the Early Start program. So think of California as California's version of early intervention being Early Start. So if you're thinking like, wait, Early Start, early intervention, what's the difference? What's the, which is one and which is the other? It's basically the same. It's California's version of early intervention is Early Start. So just want to make sure that gets cleared up. And just to go a little further about California's version of early intervention, its Early Start program. The whole purpose of this program, why it was created, was to give early intervention services for infants and toddlers, as well as their families when appropriate. It is specifically for children who are from ages, birth, age 0, to age 3 years old. So it is a service that eventually, if your child is eligible, will age out by the time they turn 3 years old. It is these kinds of services, these early intervention services, are designed specifically to improve your child's development during those crucial first years of life. And those Early Start intervention services are purchased by either the regional centers or local education agencies or school districts. Although for the most part, it's really the regional centers through DDS that are going to be the lead agencies behind the Early Start program. So that being said, there is still expected a coordination between these agencies, between the regional centers as well as the school district, especially since it is a program that eventually children will be aging out of if they're in the program. So the Early Start program is administered by the Department of Developmental Services, DDS for short, in collaboration with the California Department of Education, CDE. And just to give you an idea, DDS is the state agency that oversees the regional centers. So, there are 21 regional centers. These are nonprofit corporations spread across the state, from Los Angeles to Inland Empire to the Bay Area. And all of those regional centers, they're monitored by that state agency, DDS. So DDS monitors regional centers. School districts are school districts are led by the California Department of Education, CDE. So just giving you an idea of what these state agencies are and who they control. DDS is the lead agency for Early Start. So it's responsible for basically through the regional centers, the administration and coordination of early intervention services. DDS, also through the regional centers, also oversees the delivery of these services, like I said, through the regional centers. The local regional center is going to be your point of entry into getting your child access to early intervention services. And so if you're thinking like, okay, where do I go for if I want to get started on this whole early intervention process for my child? It's going to be your local regional center. So it's going to be whichever area you live in that is within the catchment area of that local regional center. And each regional center is going to have an early intake contact. And conveniently, DDS actually has a web page that lists all the regional centers as well as their early start contact number. So just giving you and letting you know where you can go and how you can find that information. Okay, so I've gone over like the background, the context, the underlying law, but let's really get into how can I know if my child actually qualifies for early start services in from this program. So I'm just going to go over the eligibility requirements and also just kind of going deeper what that actually means. So as I mentioned before, one of the big requirements is children would have to be ages 0 to 3 years old. Once you age 3, then if your child is already age 3 or older, then that's pretty much too late for early start. And they must at least meet one. So just one of the following criteria. So this list isn't like every single criteria. It's one of any of the 3, one or more. And that is they have a developmental delay. They have some established risk condition for a developmental delay. And they have a high risk. There's some indicating them they have a high risk having that developmental delay. I'll go into more like what this means and how in terms of like these different criteria. So just going over the developmental delay, what does that mean to have a developmental delay where my child could qualify for early start services? So it means having a delay in at least one of the following 5 areas, or no, sorry, 6 areas. This is something that was actually a recent development. Just last year, they increased it from 5 to 6. And the reason why was that one of that criteria, one of them that used to be just one, communication, was actually increased into 2 parts, both in communication, but different types of communication. So I'll just go straight into that. That is expressive communication and receptive communication. So that's why that list went from 5 to 6. So if you're thinking like, wait a minute, there's 6, but it says 5, that's because communication got expanded to 2 types of communication development. So delays in the following 6 areas: cognitive development, expressive communication, receptive communication, physical and motor development, including vision and hearing, social or emotional development, and adaptive development. And adaptive development basically means the ability to interact and act appropriately in terms of like socialization, interactions with others. So just giving you an idea what is meant by adaptive development. And so in addition to having a delay, the delay in terms of that delay of like in these areas, what does that mean? Like, okay, how much of a delay? Well, there must be a significant difference between the expected level of development for your child's age and for the child's age and the child's current level of functioning. So if the expected level of a child who is the same age as your child is going to be much different, it turns out it's going to be different or higher than the level your child actually is compared to another child of that age, then that would be a sign that indicating that they should be eligible for early start services. And I just want to just clarify a little bit further, because this relates to the recent update to the law on early start. So in addition to adding yet another area of of a delay that could indicate eligibility for early start, they actually changed the percent of that delay. So just to give you an idea, for early start intervention services, it was before it was a 33% delay in that area of development. So like the expected level and the actual level of your child was like 33%, that difference in one of these 6 areas. Well, it used to, but then last year that got changed. And so it went from 33 to 25%. If you're wondering, okay, what does that mean? It means it actually expands eligibility. It makes it so like you don't have to meet such a wide as 33%. Now it's low. Now even just a 25% delay is enough in one of these areas to make your child eligible for early start. And on top of that, that whole, splitting up communication as 2 separate areas, expressive and receptive, that also expands eligibility. Because, give you an example. Let's say your child is their results in expressive is very much behind, very, very delayed, but their results in receptive is in line, is expected. Well, even though their expressive language communication development is really delayed, because the score as combined would indicate it's not so bad because they do well as receptive, then technically, they don't actually have that bad a delay in communication that would indicate that they should be eligible for early start. And there's that realization like, oh wait, just because they're good with, we don't want to have the fact that they're doing relatively well in one communication area to take away the fact that they're having a very serious problem in another area where they need help. So now by splitting it up, it's like, okay, just because an area of communication development, your child could still be eligible for early start under another area of communication development if they're actually very well delayed in that. So just letting you know, in short, it expands eligibility. It makes it more likely that your child can be eligible for early start services. So just want to make sure there was that recent update to the early start law and why that can actually help you if you're applying for early start services for your child. Okay, so moving on. And so another one of the criteria where your child could be eligible for early start if they meet it is if they have an established risk condition. So what does that mean? It means they're diagnosed with a condition that has a high probability of leading to a developmental delay. And I gave some examples of like a diagnosis where even if right now it's too early to know where their level of development is, there's a strong likelihood that there is going to be some delay in development based on their diagnosis. So for instance, if your child has a diagnosis of Down syndrome or a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, another established risk condition that indicates that the need for early start services is other areas of disability, low incidence disability. For example, hearing, vision, severe orthopedic impairments, or a combination of these conditions. And I put down, and if you want to, see directly from the law itself how this is defined, I put the code as well. In this case, it's the California Code of Regulations. And then another criteria where your child, if they meet it, could be eligible for early start is having a high, indicating some high risk of having some developmental disability. And so what that means is that there's a risk there based on a combination of the following medical factors. And here's some specific examples of the type of factors that would show like, okay, this child, they're at risk, that they're going to, even if they don't show it yet, you know, we don't know the results yet, there's a high risk that they are going to have a developmental disability. And the safest and the best and the safest route would be to make sure they actually get early intervention in the event that they actually do have a developmental disability. So the following is like a diagnosis by a medical professional where they have premature birth, low birth weight, seizures, substance exposure. So for instance, like if a parent was taking some kind of illicit substance or other drug during pregnancy, and also accident or illness affecting their development. So these are the kind of like factors that indicate, okay, this child is at risk of having a developmental disability. And so it would be best that they have access to early intervention services just in case. Okay, so I've gone over like just the basic eligibility requirements, how your child could qualify for early start. But how does that, but let's say, okay, well, now that I know, how do I get this process started? How do I get to the point, how do I even start to get my child determined whether or not they actually qualify for early start services? So I'm just gonna, so that's gonna result from the referral. Basically, that referral of your child to receive an assessment to see and determination of eligibility for early start services. So this referral is like a recommendation, and there's actually the people who can submit that referral, that, you know, basically the person who makes that referral like to the regional center of like, hey, this child should be assessed for early start. It's actually a broad one. The big one is the parents. Yeah, you yourself, you count as a referral. You contacting the regional center directly and basically like, I want my child assessed for early start. That counts as a referral. So that counts as a referral that kickstarts that process. Other referral sources would be like your doctor, a service provider, and some other person who has grounds, who can who reaches out and lets them know that recommending assessment for early start. But and also, if you're wondering like, do I have to come with like a doctor's note, recommendation, that kind of thing? You don't have to. Just based on your request alone as a parent is enough to count as a sufficient referral to get the regional center to start on that assessment process for early start. Now, that being said, if you're wondering like, okay, how do I make that referral? That referral can be both orally or in writing. So if you like call up the regional center on the phone or the early start number for that local regional center and like, I want my child assessed for early start, or I believe, there's risk of I believe there's a risk there, I want to get this start, I'm making a referral. Then it would actually be kickstarted from the date you made that call. Now, that being said, me being an attorney, I always like having the security of having something in writing. So I recommend, so while orally does count, it doesn't hurt. In fact, I would recommend that you also put in that request in writing. Email counts, also a letter, so you can like go back and be like, yeah, I sent you this request on so-and-so date. So that's that, so you have proof right there that when you submitted that referral and that the regional center has to act and start that assessment process. And I want to give you, and it's important because once that referral is made, within 2 working days, that's when referral is within 2 working days after ID of the infant or toddler in need of early intervention. As for the referral, it starts as soon as that referral happens, which is 45 days. And I'll go over more in the following slides. So how will now, once you made that referral, you got that the assessment process is getting started. But how is eligibility determined when they get started on that process? So regional centers and school districts are responsible for ensuring that they conduct this evaluation process for early start. And like I said, going back to the earlier slides, what they do when they assess is they look at the your child's level of functioning in these 6 different areas. So that would be, like I said, cognitive, physical, and motor development, communication, which has now been expanded to be 2, a receptive and expressive communication, or expressive communication, one or the other or both, social and emotional development, and adaptive development. And that assessment, that evaluation of these of your child's level in these areas, it must be conducted in what is called a natural environment, if possible. So a natural environment would be consider it like what would be the most comfortable, best setting for your child to be evaluated for early start. And so that's very often typically going to be your home, the family home. That's where the child is living and where they're raised. Sometimes it could actually be in like a certain facility or a doctor's office. That's a possibility. And sometimes it can even, based on the parents' approval, it could even be remote or virtual. Although ideally it should, these kinds of assessments should, I believe, should be in person. But, what with the pandemic and everything, because of that, because of the whole risk of the spread of COVID, there was a period where these assessments were being conducted virtually and remotely, where, they'd have it by video teleconference. So just giving you an idea that that's also a possibility. But it would be what you as the parents believe to be the most comfortable natural environment. So just continuing on about determination for early start. So as I said, referral is made. Referral kickstarts that process of assessing for early start. So what that means is that the regional center must, conduct the assessment. And that means once they do that assessment and get the results, then they hold a meeting to determine, is your child actually eligible under those criteria I mentioned earlier for early start. If so, they then develop what is called an individualized family service plan, or IFSP, which I'll go over later in this presentation. And all of this they have to do, the assessment, the determination, the meeting to determine whether your child is eligible, the IFSP plan, all of that is done within 45 calendar days of the date that you received the referral. And let's see. Just trying to remember if there's anything more I want to touch on in terms of the referral, the assessment process. And actually, I think there was another point, but I'll touch on it next slide. So I mentioned before that there was this, this interagency and coordination. It's not just the regional center. There's a school district as well. So you may be wondering, like, okay, well, I just, which is the lead agency, which is the one ultimately responsible behind this whole early start program. So I'm just gonna just really confirm where it is that you would turn to really to act on these early start services. So the regional center, is the one responsible. There you go. There's the answer. The regional center is responsible for providing or purchasing appropriate services that are beyond the responsibilities of the school district. So there's a possibility that the school district would be involved in the whole early start process. But for the most part, it's going to be the regional center. I just want to touch on something though. In general, regional centers are described, they even call themselves the payers of last resort. What that means is that any service that you could get for your child from another, if it's the same or similar, and you could get it from another agency for free, then you do have to go through that generic agency and before you go to the regional center. But, and I'm going to touch on this more later in the slides, that should not be a reason to delay necessary early intervention services. I just want to touch on that. I'll explain more in the following slides. So I've gone over, now that I've gone over the background, the eligibility, how you kickstart that whole process to determine eligibility. Now let's say, okay, your child's been found eligible. They qualify for early start services. What now? Well, an important part, an integral part of that process is going to be the Individualized Family Service Plan, IFSP for short. So what is it? What is this IFSP? Well, as the name says, it's a service plan. It is a plan of the kinds of services and supports your child needs to address developmental delays. It is developed once eligibility for early start services is confirmed. And think of, really consider the IFSP as a contract for your child, whichever age your child is under 3, a contract between them and the regional center. It is a contract that is a roadmap of services. It identifies services appropriate to meet your child's needs, and it does so by writing up goals, objectives, and the kind of services to meet those goals and objectives. And importantly, those are services that are agreed to by the IFSP team. And the IFSP team is going to include you, the parents. And I also want to let you know that in addition to being agreed to by the team, nonetheless, whatever services are going to require your approval. So it's going to be your consent and approval to implementation of those services that really make sure that your child actually gets those services. And just to expand on okay, the IFSP team, who is in this team that is going to be making the decisions about services for my child. Of course, it's you, the parent, or if in the case of a guardianship or adoption type of situation, the foster parent, the guardian, that's going to be you are going to be in that team. Any other family members, if you request it. So it doesn't have to so you can include other people if appropriate and if you request it to be part of that IFSP team, to be in that meeting. You can actually have an advocate also at that IFSP team if you request it. In fact, you can even have an attorney. Again, if an attorney agrees to be at that IFSP team. The service coordinator, that's going to be that coordinator from the regional center, coordinating the services in the plan. Any of the professionals involved who did the evaluation or the assessment. So the ones who did that whole assessment process for, whether your child qualifies for early start, they would be in that team. And also the service providers, those who actually are going to be the agencies or the members from those agencies actually providing those services for your child. So for example, if it's like a speech therapy service, then the agency that provides the speech therapy, whoever from their organization would also be part of that IFSP team. So so that being said, it's a plan, it's a roadmap, but okay, what's the process for it's not just because the IFSP, it's It's the actual process that results in that document that identifies these services. But how does that actually work? So your child's IFSP, there's like a meeting, and it would result in this contract, in this plan that includes the following: your child's present levels of functioning, their need, relevant family information, the major results or outcomes expected to be achieved for your child, or of the family if they're involved in that in the child's development. The specific early intervention services your child will be receiving. That's important. When, where, how much, and how often your child will receive those services. Who will pay for the services? So that's important to get in that plan. Make sure a regional center puts down, we're going to be paying and providing those early start services. The name of the service coordinator, and also importantly, transition planning. Remember, earlier I said it is a program where your child will eventually age out once they turn 3. So there does have to be that that transition planning that addresses that. Okay, what's going to happen by the time your child turns 3? So there's going to be that transition. Transition would be addressed in the IFSP as well. So how is it actually developed and drafted out, this IFSP? And then how often is it reviewed? So and this slide will answer that. The multidisciplinary team, which is going to be the IFSP team, including you as the parent or guardian, it develops the IFSP from that assessment of the needs, the areas of development or delays relating to your child, ages 0 to 3. The IFSP identifies the services appropriate to meet such needs. That IFSP is evaluated at least once a year. That said, the plan itself is actually reviewed every 6 months or more if you request it, or if necessary. So if it's like, oh, we need to have an IFSP meeting sooner rather than having to wait the whole 6 months because of these reasons or these issues, then you as a parent, you have a right to request that. And then just kind of going further in that development of that IFSP, the IFSP meeting must be held at places and at times convenient for the family, for you. It's not just like, okay, here's the time and place, yes or no. No, they have to respect what's the regional center has to respect that and go with a time and a place that works best for you as the parents or guardians of your child. The lead agency, it's going to be the regional center, but there are circumstances where it could be the school district, must obtain your consent in developing and implementing that IFSP, because your informed written consent is required to get these services started for your child, whatever is written into the IFSP. And so what that means is that, like, it's not just that you consent to it, it needs to be informed. You need to know exactly what these services are and what they mean. So the responsible agency, regional center, must fully explain to you the contents of your child's IFSP, the outcomes, this list of needed services, the goals and objectives. And then once you give that consent, those services must be provided ASAP, as soon as possible, because, in early development, every month counts. That being said, if for whatever reason you're like, oh, actually, I have an issue with this, or I'm no longer comfortable with this service, you can revoke your consent, and it can be at any time. So just letting you know, once you consent, it's not to a service or services in the IFSP, it's not written in stone. You can always, whatever circumstances you believe may require you can choose to revoke that consent to the services and the IFSP. So I think this is going to be a good point to have a break. Give our break to our fantastic interpreter who has patiently and valiantly interpreted my long-winded explanations. So I'm going to give a 5-minute break, and we'll pop in back, or I'll resume around 6:50-ish, and on the area of native language rights.
Okay, and I'm going to stop the recording for now.
Our interpreter for all your help and being able to translate this. Okay, so as I said, leaving off with native language rights, and we'll go into just your rights in terms of language access as it relates to the Early Start program. So native language rights. What is one's native language? It is the language that the client, or in this case, the parent of the client, normally uses or prefers. The regional center must provide information in a manner that is as culturally and linguistically appropriate. And this is literally the language in the law itself. It has to be appropriate in terms of your culture and your language. And now that being said, what does that mean? What actually should be or must be in my native language if I am not proficient in English, or that is not my or English is not my preferred language? So there's so this is the following: the actual initial intake meeting. So let's say your preferred language, your first language is Spanish. So that would be your native language. So that means, and yeah, I'm speaking in terms of you as the parent of your child, who is ages 0 to 3. The actual intake meeting that discusses the results of the of that whole Early Start assess, that's got to be in Spanish. The actual assessments, that information should be provided to you in Spanish. The actual IFSP meeting, going over the plan and the services for your child, also in your native language. The actual document that's written after or relating to that meeting also should be provided and translated in your native language. And also the supports and services. It should be, you have a right to be explained to you and provided in Spanish, your native language. And going further on that, so like I had mentioned in the previous slide, the regional center must provide you a copy of your child's IFSP in your native language, unless DDS, and as you recall, DDS is that state agency that monitors all the regional centers, unless DDS determines that it would be an undue hardship for the regional center to do so. So basically, like, this is too much of a burden, too much of a cost, too much of an undue undue hardship for the regional center to provide that information in your native language. Now, that being said, they would have to. This is a kind of situation where it would have to be a particularly big hardship, and if it's a reassurance, languages that are commonly spoken in California, example, a big one being Spanish, that would not be a language where there would be an undue hardship for the regional center to provide a translation. Now, if there's like a particular language that's rarely spoken, that the family speaks, that's rarely spoken in California, that could be a possibility that it would be an undue hardship for the regional center to provide translation. But for the most part, this shouldn't be a barrier to you getting your information in your child's information and IFSP in your native language. You can get a copy of, or you have to, the regional center has to get a copy of your child's IFSP in your native language within a reasonable amount of time. Again, unless it's some kind of undue burden as determined by DDS. And even then, it's like you can still get you would still be able to get a copy of it, but it could be longer if, let's say, for whatever reason, it would be an additional burden or cost to have the regional center provide it within that reasonable amount of time. But like I said, for the most part, that should not be a barrier to getting that IFSP in your native language. And just to further points on this, the regional center must state your child's native language, or in this case, your native language in the IFSP. If the regional center does not this last point points to touches on where an issue where if the regional center doesn't appropriately acknowledge your native language and your need to get information on your child's IFSP in your native language. If the regional center does not document your native language or does not do an intake, assessment, evaluation, or the IFSP planning in your native language, even if you request it, you have the right to file a complaint. So you can file an administrative complaint to the regional center, to the director of the regional center, and just letting them know that that getting information in a language you understand is a right that you, as your child's guardian or parent, are entitled to. So just letting you know that if they're not actually providing this that interpretation support, there is a process where you can make your concerns known to the regional center. And I just want to go over what's the role of this regional center service coordinator? I mean, obviously it's going to be service coordination, but just going over like in detail how they're supposed to be helping you and your child. So they coordinate all services across agency lines. That being said, they often or should be that single point of contact to help you as the parent obtain the services and assistance that your child needs. They develop and review the IFSP, and that includes coordinating those evaluations, like the individual, those assessors who are going to actually do those tests, and helping to facilitate delivery of the services that the team agrees that your child needs as a form of early intervention. They seek the appropriate services necessary to benefit the development of, each child, each of their the clients in their caseload, and also important, they facilitate the development of a transition plan to preschool services. So, like I said before, because there is that inevitable aging out of early start by age 3 years old, then their service coordinator is going to must include that plan of how it's going to work transitioning out of early start. So I've gone over just in detail about the whole early start process and evaluation, and you're thinking, okay, but what kind of services can my child actually get under the early start program? So it's actually a very broad list, and it is a list based on the needs of your child, as determined by the evaluations and assessments that are conducted to look at that level of delay and current functioning. So I'm going to go more into that in the following slides. So I'm just including a list. These are the actual types of services that your child could get, and if they need it, should get, as listed in the law. So that could be assistive technology, AT, an example like, a certain type of device or app that allows your child to, that's important to their development. Audiology, family training. This is a big one because there are going to be services where a component of may require the involvement of the family. An example would be ABA, applied behavioral analysis. That kind of service often involves the service provider, including in the family, the parents, in that process of how to address and teach your child as it relates, with appropriate behavior. So family training, that's actually counts as a type of early start service. Counseling and home visits, health services, medical services for purposes of evaluation or diagnosis. So if there's going to be like a medical type of service, not specifically tied to addressing or your child's developmental disability or risk of a developmental disability, then that's not going to fall under the kind of service that counts as early start. But if it's for purposes of like evaluating, diagnosing, determining like, okay, this is what my child needs to address current or potential developmental delays, that would be something that you could get under early start. So going on, nursing services, nutrition services, therapies like occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychological services, as I mentioned before, coordinating services across different types of agencies or providers. Sign language, that's actually one that's come up. So like, for example, we've had cases where or situations where families had a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, or even nonverbal. So like where it's determined, like actually for their development, given these, their limitations in communication, sign language would be recommended to help develop those language skills. And so that is an example where that is a type of early start service that is specific to that child whose development would benefit from that kind of communication, learning and support. So, just want to point that out. It's especially becoming, especially since like the whole individuals having access to effective services who are deaf or hard of hearing is an important part that can't be, separated from developmental disability if it applies to your child. Social work services, special instruction, transportation, and vision services. And like I said, this is a non-exhaustive list. It's just it's supposed to be specific to your child's needs, but these are an example of the kinds of services that fall under early start. So I had mentioned it earlier in this presentation, but it is important for me to go into detail about the requirement of exhausting generic resources, but also why it should not be a barrier to your child getting necessary early start services as soon as possible. So if you're just going over like, okay, what's a generic resource? What's a generic agency? So a generic agency, as this is literally like how it's defined in the law, is any agency receiving public funds with a legal responsibility to serve all members of the general public. And for those of you who may have children who are over age 3 and already getting services from the regional center as a full-on consumer, you may be familiar with this, the whole generic resource, generic agency requirement. And that's because regional centers and also local education agencies, if they're involved, they call themselves the payers of last resort. And that literally means, oh, well, we will pay for it, but after you exhaust the other potential resources that could give you that service or your child that service instead. And And so below are like, these are more examples of like types of generic resources. Not quite the school district yet, because you know your child's not going to be in school yet from age 0 to 3 for the most part. But you know, Medi-Cal, private insurance, that's a big one that comes up. Like if the service your child needs, you could actually get it from your insurance and they can pay for it instead of us, the regional center, then go to them instead. You go to them, and then only when they say no, or they deny, or it's not actually appropriate, or it's not like quite the same, it's not actually the appropriate or type of service your child needs, then you come back to us, the regional centers, and ask for that service. So that's what it's meant when it says like they're prohibited from, the regional centers are prohibited from purchasing any service that would otherwise be available from a generic agency or a generic resource. So now you're wondering like, oh shoot, so you know, if my child needs this service to help them address or prevent some developmental delay, am I going to have to go through all these possible agencies first, and only then, if I get a denial or something, can I finally go back to the regional center? Wouldn't that take a long time? And so I'm just going to address that and reassure you why it shouldn't be a barrier. And that implies, and because I mentioned before that one of the generic resources often includes like private insurance or other types of insurance plans. So regional centers, they do require parents to use private insurance to pay for medical services. That, you know, remember I mentioned like purely medical services that are not directly related to the potential developmental disability. Now that being said, this may not include payment for like the deductible or the copay. Sorry. Let me rephrase. This may include paying deductibles or copayments, but not if it's for the actual evaluation or assessment of your child. So like the assessment and evaluation of these are the areas of development potential delays. That is not something that would be required of you as in terms of paying the deductible or copayment, because it is going to be relevant to early start eligibility determinations. And now you may be wondering, what if this process, this whole, okay, you got to go through your private insurance, you got to go through them, and you know, then before you can come back to us about whether we'll pay for that service or not for your child. If this process in any way delays your child getting those needed early start services, then the regional center can't, then what that means is that the regional center has to act, and they have to jump in and cover that service and be responsible until that generic agency takes responsibility. So the law requires the regional centers to allow immediate funding of necessary services. And the reason is obvious. It's the whole point of early intervention services is to address those delays or prevent those delays in those crucial years of the earliest years of life. And that means is that, you know, from age 0 to 3, that means every month counts. So if there's going to be a delay, if it's like, okay, this whole process of having to go through generic resources, well, that could take months or even just days, then that should be a reason for the regional center to actually take responsibility and act on that. So they can still, in the interim, look into like generic resources that can cover that service eventually, or reimburse them for that service that they should have been covering. But until then, the regional center is responsible for that early intervention service. Just going more into early start rules as it relates to private insurance. So if you are unable to get a decision from your private insurer whether they approve or deny a claim, then that shouldn't be an excuse for the regional center to permit delay or denial of services, early start services for your child. So that being said, while the need for early intervention services puts the onus on the regional center to act quickly and get those services for your child or arrange for them for your child, that doesn't mean you completely don't, you still have a responsibility to at least give information to the regional center to help them if eventually to get that generic resource involved. So you have to provide copies of the health benefit card, your private insurance, Medi-Cal, Medicare. But that being said, if the lack of private insurance or other benefits, so if you don't actually have insurance or benefits that could possibly cover that service, that should not be used to negatively impact access to services. So once again, if your child needs it, the regional center has to cover it. That being said, though, you should still make available relevant or important information in case there is a generic resource or agency that can cover that, or they can cover, if they do, eventually they can take over or reimburse the regional center for that. Sorry. Early intervention services must not be denied or delayed for children of parents who are unable to pay their insurance co-payments or deductibles. So that's another area where there's this co-payment or deduct, even if the regional center agrees to cover, or even if a generic resource agrees to cover that, or there still is co-pay or deductible that I can't afford, I, the parent, then those services shouldn't be denied on that basis. Regional center should still help you in covering that or making that so that your child accesses that necessary early start service. Okay, and so I've gone over the whole process about the early start application and assessment and how you can get your child to qualify. But but what I'd say, let's say your child, now you're at the point where your child qualifies for early start, great. But what if something happens? What if there's an issue or a disagreement or some other problem that where there needs to be a resolution of that dispute? What do you do? Where do you go? So I'm just gonna go over what your options are in terms of filing a complaint, or even bringing it up to, or even going through the whole due process procedure. So one option you have in the event that there's a violation, there's a service where your child, where the team agreed to, but never actually got provided, then you have a right to file a complaint with DDS, that state agency I mentioned before. So that complaint must include a description of the violation by the regional center that relates to the provision of the early intervention service. So there was a service that the team agreed your child needed. It was written in the IFSP, but then for whatever, they never actually got it, or it never got arranged. So that's just giving you an idea of okay, here's a violation here, because there's no dispute about, from the team about what the service is and that they need it. It's, are they actually providing it? Now, that being said, there is a time restraint limit on that. DDS must receive that complaint within 1 year of the date of that violation by the regional center. And within 60 days after DDS receives your complaint, DDS must investigate and release a written decision on what its findings are. And if there are any, whatever corrective actions the regional center must take. So again, this this whole, doing this investigation, releasing that decision, that all has to be within 60 days, 2 months after DDS receives your complaint. You can submit your own written and signed statements. And like you can draft your own complaint. Again, as long as you describe what the violation is, the time, the details, what you want the remedy or resolution to be. But also helpful, there is a form provided by DDS. There's like an actual form that you can use to fill out and send to DDS. So I put the link at the bottom. Now, in addition to the complaint, so the complaint is like if there's a straight up violation, you know that there's a service your child needed. It was written in the IFSP, but your child didn't get it. But let's say there's like an active disagreement, like what you like. So it's like, remember how I said earlier, like, oh, if the IFSP team agrees to a service, then it's written in the IFSP, and once you give consent, your child will get that service. But let's say the team doesn't agree. So let's say you as a parent, you say, oh, my child would, to address their delay, they would need this type of service. Let's say speech therapy or some as an example. And then, but the rest of the team, like the service coordinator or are like, oh, we don't believe based on the info we have, based on our understanding of the report of the assessment, that your child does need speech therapy. So it's like, okay, there's a disagreement here. There's a dispute. And I'm just giving you an example. There are other ways that there could be an active disagreement about what early start services your child needs and should be getting. Then there is this option called the due process hearing. So the whole point of the due process hearing is to resolve disagreements between parents and the regional center, or if the school district is involved, the school district, involving any matter related to early start. And it's a fairly quick process. That hearing must be completed within 30 days from when your request for due process is received. And if you're and so just to clarify, the agency the office that actually handles and hears these disputes, it's called the Office of Administrative Hearings, OAH. So it'd actually be through OAH where you could submit a due process hearing request, and then OAH provides the administrative law judge. The judge hears both sides. It's supposed to be a quick and informal process, so it's like not a big scary court or something. A lot of times it's like literally in a regional center office conference room. Lately, it's actually been virtual. So I've been to not early start, but I've been to a fair hearing with OAH where it was literally Zoom, just like this. So that is that's sort of an overview of what a due process would be like. And that decision from that judge about trying to resolve, in resolving that dispute, it is final, unless this is another option you have if you disagree with that, based on you maintain that the judge made an error, or in the facts or in the law. You can appeal that decision to the appropriate superior court, or civil action. But it is going to be something that you would have to do with your own time and your own resources. But it'll let you know that you do have that appeal option. And I mentioned before that a big part of the IFSP is going to involve that transition planning, because eventually your child's going to turn 3 years old, and they're going to age out of early start. Now so I just want to touch on what that transition planning is, but I also want to go into the whole process of Lanterman services. So basically what that means is that the difference between Early Start through the regional center and the Lanterman services through the regional center. Because even though the regional centers operate both of them, Early Start, Lanterman, they're different. And just because your child is eligible for Early Start does not mean that they are automatically eligible for Lanterman services after they turn 3. So if you're wondering what I mean by this, I'm going to go as I'll explain as I'm going through the slide. So, but first, transition planning. So transition planning occurs 6 months before your child's 3rd birthday. And and then 90 days, so about a month and a half before your child turns 3 years old, the service coordinator must send a referral to the local school district. So that's like that's where they get the school district involved. If you're, for preschool services, or, to determine, to see if your child would be eligible for special education. And the regional, and then that may involve regional center assessment. And this is where I touch on the Lanterman services. So your child's about they're going on 3 years old. They're going to age out. And so you're wondering, like, okay, is that it? Regional center is completely out now. They're just gonna, once they make that referral to the school district, and after my child turns 3, they're just out. It depends. So it depends on if your child is eligible for Lanterman Act services after age 3. And again, it's not automatic. Just because your child gets Early Start services does not mean that they are eligible for Lanterman Act services. And because it could be that, your child, they had a risk of development, or they had a delay, but by the time they turn 3, it looks like that they don't actually have a substantive developmental disability. So therefore, regional centers, their child will not qualify for continued services from the regional center. And so how that works is the regional center will do an assessment. That's usually how it happens, when your child to determine should they continue getting services from the regional center after age 3. And so that's why I really wanted to clarify that point. So, if your child is they're assessed by the regional center, and there's a whole different list of criteria for eligibility for regional center Lanterman Act services, and I can do a whole presentation just on that. But in short, to be eligible for regional center services after age 3, your child has to have a substantial developmental disability. And there is in the law, they go over, it does explain what that is and what that means, but it does involve a reassessment by the regional center. If the regional center determines, based on their analysis of your child's records, or if they choose to do their own full assessment, that your child meets the criteria, then your child will continue getting regional center services, but no longer as an Early Start program. Now they're like full-on clients of the regional center. And once you become a client of the regional center, you're eligible to get those services for your child anyway, for the rest of their life. So including after they become adults. But if the regional center determines that, okay, yeah, you were eligible for Early Start, but now we see that your child doesn't exhibit that they have a ongoing substantial developmental disability, then that's going to be the end of the regional center's involvement. And so just giving you an idea, just letting you explaining how the difference is. Now, that being said, if you disagree with that, if you're like, no, my child does have a substantial developmental disability and they're going to continue to have one even after they turn 3, just want to let you know, you have the right to appeal. You can actually appeal a regional center's decision denying eligibility for regional center services. And also, you can apply for regional center services for your child at any age, or if you yourself have a developmental disability, you can apply on your own terms if you're older. It doesn't have to be like right after your child turns 3. So just wanted to clarify that. But also important, there was actually a recent developed change in the law that expanded eligibility for regional center services. So just another little wrinkle. So what happened was that, remember when I said that to qualify for regional center services, your child had to meet all of the specific criteria showing they had a substantial developmental disability. And it's a specific list of criteria and factors and one of them is they have to have these limitations in these 7 areas, at least 3 of the 7 areas. Any less than 3, then it's okay, they don't meet all the criteria. Your child doesn't qualify for regional center services. But then there was a change that expanded it, at least for from until age 5. So basically it's okay, we assessed your child. They seem, and it looks like they have a limitation in less than 3 of the 7 areas. So 2 or 1, or sorry, or 2. Yeah, it'd have to be at least 2. 2 of those 7 areas. And the 7 areas are they're listed. I can't say off the top of my head, but they are. I included but we do have. There's the Lanterman Act rule that goes over into what those are. But if they meet even if they meet just 2, rather than 3 of them or more, your child could still be eligible at least until age 5. So that's what it means by provisional eligibility. So the idea is that okay, you know what? It's maybe your child's just too young to determine what their full functional levels are. So it's it would not be really fair to say that they only are limited in these areas if they're so young, and so much could change as they get older within those from after age 3. So the whole point of provisional eligibility is, okay, normally you'd have to meet all 3 of at least 7 of the functional limitations in addition to having a diagnosis of a developmental disability. But if your child is under 5 and they meet at least 2, well then, you know what, we're gonna make it your child eligible for now. But when they turn age 5 years old, we're gonna reassess and see if your child actually meets all the criteria, including at least 3 of the 7, not just 2. And if they actually do, great, then they're full on eligible. If they're not, well then you're not eligible. So that's what meant by provisional eligibility, just kind of covering that gray area where your child is still developing and it's not really clear if they full on show developmental limitations in all areas. So it's okay, we'll have them eligible for now, but we'll look at it again when your child turns 5. So just that's what's meant by provisional eligibility. And I'm hoping that and it again expands eligibility, at least for the time being, for your child. So just letting you know that important facet, that change to eligibility that can help you and your child even after your child technically ages out of early start. Okay. So thank you guys for putting up with that long-winded presentation. We have reached the end, and I just want to leave off with a list of our resources. So this is our website, our Disability Rights California. We have, and through our website, we have numerous publications specifically geared toward parents or families of individuals with disabilities, and even to the people who have disabilities. So these are publications that go over special education. So, for instance, our big one is the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual, the SIR manual. That's actually where the information on Early Start is. So that was why I talked about there's that interesting overlap of the school district and the regional centers, and you're like, wait a minute, if regional centers administer it, why is it in the SIR manual with the school with special education? And it's because it's technically under IDEA, but letting you know that you can find all the information I talked about early start, it's in the SIR manual, the special education. But since the regional centers are involved in all of this, if you're also thinking like, I want to see if my child qualifies for Lanterman Act services after they turn 3, we've got another great manual, rights under the Lanterman Act, or RULA for short. And we actually recently updated all the chapters because there was actually some changes in the law over just like within the past couple years or so. So all of those chapters available online. We have Spanish versions of those chapters, both for the SIR and the RULA. They're all on our website. But if you also want that information in another language that's not that we don't have on our website, reach out to us. We will and let us know, and we will try to make that information available to you in a language you can understand. So just letting you know that is you can always reach that you have that option of going to these resources, but you can also reach out to us directly. And on the next slide, that includes our intake line. So if you have a question or a concern or a disability related issue, then please contact our intake line. That is specifically what it is for. And the intake that and so that's the so I include the number and the office hours, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And often how it works is that you contact the intake line, you explain your issue or your family member's issue, and then the intake staff actually themselves are very knowledgeable. They will themselves help give you answers or direct you to the right information. But they also can refer or raise this issue with the appropriate practice group at DRC. So I'm from one of them, the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, right there, IDD. But we have many practice groups. We've got one for youth and education. We've got a practice group for civil rights. We got a practice group for mental health. We got a practice group for investigations. So it's not just, so we got a bunch of different groups with attorneys, and depending on our capacity and our resources, we decide on whether we take on your case or provide advocacy or representation, and it's always free of charge. Also popping in another component of DRC, our Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy. And that's another potential resource that can help you as it relates to questions with Regional Center, especially if you're already a client of the Regional Center. So, so there you go, our intake line, Office of Clients' Rights, and I also included my email as well. If you have any, although that being said, if it's a general issue, it's our policy that we do direct you through intake. So, so if you ask me a question directly, I will have to direct you through intake, but I'm letting you know my email in case there is something of particular interest or update that would be helpful for me to know.
So just to let you know that our intake hours have changed, Emily, it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 3 now, according to Raymond. So we'll change that on a PowerPoint as well. It's also posted on the chat. Okay.
Thank you, Lonnie, for that, for correcting me on that. And okay, so it's 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And so now that we've reached the end, this opens up to question and answer if you have questions. And that being said, we usually turn off the recording at this point, just because,
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for spending time with us, learning more about Early Start. Thank you, Disability Rights California team, for the excellent presentation. families. Appreciate your time with us tonight. I know you are busy with your families. But anyway, if you have any questions, please connect with us, and we will be sending the materials tomorrow, maybe in the afternoon, with all the PowerPoint presentations, links, and referrals and resources that will be shared. Thank you. Have a good evening, and see you next time. We have a lot of trainings coming up, so please follow our Facebook account, FRC San Mateo County, and also look at our calendar events available in our website. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Patricia,
Thank you.
Gabrielle, and
Thank you.
to our
Thank-
interpreter. Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Good night.